Look at this one. They sent me a librarian to operate a multi-billion-dollar signals intelligence platform. The voice of Master Sergeant Cole Vance cut through the sterile, climate-controlled air of the Advanced Cyber Warfare Center, sharp and condescending. The crowd of trainees, a mix of ambitious sergeants and cocky specialists, chuckled nervously. They all stood in a semicircle around the central command console, a gleaming altar of black composite and glowing screens. Vance, a man whose ego was as polished as the jump boots he wore, gestured with a dismissive wave toward the small figures seated at the terminal. Honestly, Sergeant, are you sure you're in the right building? The post library is 2 blocks down. They have a lovely section on 18th century poetry. Probably more your speed. He was a bull of a man, thick-necked and barrel-chested, a veteran of a bygone era of intelligence where volume and aggression were mistaken for competence. His gaze was a physical weight, intended to crush and intimidate. The target of his scorn, Sergeant Anya Sharma, did not flinch. She did not look up. She did not offer a retort or even a change in her placid expression. Her focus remained entirely on the diagnostic screen in front of her, her hands moving in a slow, deliberate dance as she calibrated the quantum entanglement sensor array. She was small, almost bird-like, with a quiet intensity that Vance mistook for timidity. Her uniform was immaculate, but seemed to hang on her, as if she were a ghost occupying it, a temporary resident in a world of noise and bravado. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun, revealing a face that was unadorned and serious. She was the antithesis of everything Vance believed a warrior should be. She was silence in a room built for sound. But when the facility's commanding officer, Colonel Evans, who stood half-hidden in the shadows of the observation deck above, saw the way her fingers rested on the keyboard, not typing, but hovering with a pianist's delicate precision, he felt a familiar, deep-seated recognition. It was a stillness he hadn't seen in 20 years. Not since a dusty command tent in a forgotten corner of the world where a legendary operator had single-handedly averted a catastrophe with just a satellite phone and an unbreakable calm. Evans leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, a forgotten memory stirring in the depths of his mind. The laughter in the room died down, but the tension remained, thick and cloying. Vance wasn't finished. He paced before Sharma's console, his voice dripping with theatrical sarcasm. You see, class, this is what happens when recruitment quotas meet reality. The modern military wants to be inclusive. It wants to give everyone a chance. But out there, he jabbed a thumb toward the world map projected on the main wall, pulsating with simulated threat vectors. The enemy doesn't care about your feelings. They don't care if you're having a bad day. They care about one thing: competence. Raw, undeniable, aggressive competence. He stopped directly behind Sharma, leaning in so his voice was a low growl in her ear. Something you wouldn't know the first thing about. Still, she said nothing. Her only response was the soft, almost imperceptible click of an optical switch as she finalized the system's primary linkage. The sound was a whisper against the storm of Vance's arrogance. If you believe that true strength is measured not in words, but in actions, type competence below. The air in the training center was a symphony of manufactured tension. The low, omnipresent hum of the servers provided a baseline, while the frantic clicking of keyboards from the 20 other trainees became the percussion of rising panic. Master Sergeant Vance had initiated the final certification exercise, codenamed Cerberus, and it was living up to its name. It was a monster, a three-headed beast of electronic warfare, designed not merely to test the operators, but to break them. Hidden within that storm was a single, needle-thin transmission, a burst data packet from a simulated high-value target, encrypted with a next-generation algorithm that, theoretically, shouldn't even be in the field for another 5 years. Vance's objective was simple and cruel: make them fail. He wanted to demonstrate the system's complexity and, by extension, his own indispensable mastery of it. He stalked the room like a predator, peering over shoulders, his comments sharp and biting. Too slow, specialist. You just lost him. Wrong filter, Sergeant. You're chasing a ghost signal from a Russian weather satellite. Did you even read the manual, Corporal? Or did you just use it for a pillow? His confidence was absolute, a fortress built on the expected failures of others. He saw their furrowed brows, their tense shoulders, the sheen of sweat on their temples. This was his domain, a kingdom of controlled chaos where he was the undisputed king. He saved his most potent venom for Sergeant Sharma. He loomed behind her console, a smug smile playing on his lips, waiting for the inevitable moment her screen would flash red with the telltale sign of system overload or catastrophic error. Her station was an island of tranquility in the sea of panic. Her breathing was even, her posture relaxed. Her focus was so complete that she seemed to exist in a separate reality, a bubble of pure concentration. Vance saw it as paralysis, the quiet panic of someone completely out of their depth. He scoffed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The librarian is probably trying to figure out how to check out an ebook. Any minute now, she'll hit the wrong button and accidentally order a pizza. He was about to move on, to find another trainee to belittle when he noticed something odd. The frantic cascade of data on Sharma's screen had stopped. It was replaced by a single, serene, unblinking line of turquoise code against a black background. It wasn't the red of failure. It wasn't the chaotic green of raw data. It was something else entirely. It was silence. Digital silence. Vance's smirk faltered. System crash, he muttered, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Figures. She probably overwhelmed the particle processor. He stepped closer, ready to deliver a final, crushing lecture on the importance of not touching equipment you don't understand. But the silence on her screen wasn't an absence of data. It was the presence of something perfect. The exercise, known as the Cerberus Protocol, was Vance's masterpiece of instructional cruelty. He'd spent months designing it with engineers from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It wasn't just a test, it was a digital nightmare. The simulation flooded the network with the electronic equivalent of an entire carrier strike group, a dozen commercial airliners, 3 separate Allied task forces, and the background radiation of a minor solar storm, all operating simultaneously in a contested airspace. Woven into this tapestry of digital chaos were 7 distinct layers of enemy deception. There were ghost signals that mimicked the target's signature perfectly before vanishing. There were encrypted loops designed to trap an operator's filters in an infinite cycle, burning out their processors. There were even AI-driven decoys that would actively react to being scanned, shifting their frequency and encryption to lead the analyst on a wild goose chase. To find a real target, a single intermittent burst of data lasting only 12 seconds every 90 seconds was considered impossible on the first try. The stated goal was simply to teach the trainees how to manage catastrophic failure. Vance stood with his arms crossed, watching the room descend into the predictable state of intellectual surrender. He saw the sweat, the frustration, the resigned expressions of defeat. It read, //transmission isolated, HV Tango, 7 //ENCR1 protocol. AES, quantum V42 // decryption alphanumeric string, 256 characters long, / source ID. Commander Valerie Orloff / source _ verified / location. Grid 34 RF 8675 309 / threat. Imminent / Vance's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. He read the lines again and again. The words seemed to warp and twist, refusing to make sense. Isolate the transmission? That was the goal, yes, but no one was supposed to achieve it this quickly. Decrypt the protocol? That was impossible. The V42 quantum algorithm was a theoretical construct. It required a server farm the size of a city block and weeks of processing time to crack. Identify the source by name? That was beyond impossible. It would require cross-referencing the signal's infinitesimal biometric feedback with a deeply classified, multinational intelligence database that he, the lead instructor, didn't even have access to. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in Vance's stomach. He looked from the screen to Sharma. She hadn't moved. Her hands were resting calmly on the console, her expression unchanged. It was the calm of a creator admiring their work. The other trainees, sensing the dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere, had stopped what they were doing. Their keyboards fell silent. One by one, they turned to look. The only sound was the low hum of the servers, a sound that now seemed less like background noise and more like a collective, held breath. Vance's mouth opened, but no words came out. His entire worldview, his carefully constructed hierarchy of competence, had just been vaporized by a single line of text on a screen. He finally managed to stammer, a pathetic whisper that was swallowed by the deafening silence. No way. That's not possible. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of noise. It had become a physical presence, a heavy blanket of astonishment that smothered all thought. Every eye was fixed on Sharma's console, on the impossible lines of text that glowed with an almost supernatural authority. The collective disbelief was so thick you could taste it, a metallic tang of shattered assumptions. Master Sergeant Vance stared, his face a mask of pale, slack-jawed confusion. The foundations of his professional identity, his expertise, his authority, his carefully cultivated arrogance, had been turned to dust in less than a second. He was an expert in a field whose known limits had just been casually and utterly obliterated by the quiet woman he had dismissed as a librarian. He reached out a trembling hand, as if to touch the screen, to confirm it was real, but stopped short. The calm emanating from Sergeant Sharma was now more intimidating than any physical threat. Her silence was no longer passive. It was dominant. It was the silence of a mountain, unmovable and absolute, a stark contrast to his own blustering noise which now seemed hollow and foolish. Into this charged stillness, a new sound emerged, the slow, deliberate tread of polished boots descending the metal staircase from the observation deck. Every head turned. Colonel Evans emerged from the shadows, his face calm and unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed solely on Sharma. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of decades of command, his presence instantly reordering the room's chaotic energy. He ignored the stunned trainees. He walked past the frozen figure of Master Sergeant Vance, as if he were a piece of furniture. He came to a halt not at Sharma's screen, but beside her chair. He didn't look at the data. He didn't need to. He looked down at her, and for the first time, she turned her head and met his gaze. There was no subservience in her eyes, no triumph. There was only a quiet, professional acknowledgement. A silent understanding passed between them, a conversation conducted in a language of shared experience that no one else in the room could comprehend. "Report, Sergeant," Colonel Evans said, his voice quiet but carrying the effortless authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sharma's reply was soft, yet every syllable was perfectly clear, cutting through the tension with the precision of a scalpel. "Cerberus protocol neutralized, sir. Threat identified and tracked. System performance exceeds projected parameters by 400%. She had not just completed the exercise. She had critiqued the multi-billion-dollar system itself and found it wanting." The colonel gave a single, slow nod. He then turned to Vance, his expression hardening. "Master Sergeant, bring up Sergeant Sharma's personnel file on the main screen. Security override code, Evans, Omega 7-7. Authorize." Vance fumbled with the master console, his fingers clumsy and slick with a sudden sweat. The override code was one reserved for the highest echelons of command, a digital key that unlocked the military's deepest secrets. He typed it in, his heart pounding against his ribs. The screen flickered, and a new file appeared, stark and heavily redacted. The name at the top read, Sharma, NYA, SGT, U.S. Army, and beneath it the room saw the truth. Colonel Evans stood impassively as Master Sergeant Vance, his hands shaking almost imperceptibly, navigated the layers of security protocols. The master console beeped its confirmation, and Sergeant Anya Sharma's file bloomed across the massive wall screen, silencing any remaining whispers of doubt. The top of the file was standard: name, rank, service number. But below that, where there should have been a long list of previous assignments, training courses, and duty stations, there was only a single stark entry. Unit, Joint Special Operations Command, Intelligence Support Activity. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Intelligence Support Activity, or ISA, was a ghost. It was the deepest, most clandestine intelligence unit in the entire U.S. military, a Tier 1 special mission unit so secret that the government had for years officially denied its existence. They were the spies who spied on the spies, the operators who went where no one else could go, armed not with rifles, but with antennas and algorithms. They were legends, whispered about in hushed tones in secure facilities around the world. To the trainees in the room, seeing that unit designation was like a group of parish priests suddenly discovering that the new, quiet nun in their convent was actually an archangel. Colonel Evans's voice cut through their awe, cold and precise. "Read the commendations, Master Sergeant." Aloud, Vance swallowed hard, his own voice now a strained, unfamiliar thing. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with V device, Bronze Star 3rd Oak Leaf Cluster, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service Commendation Medal. The list went on, a litany of valor and service that would have been remarkable for a command sergeant major at the end of a 30-year career. For a sergeant who looked barely old enough to vote, it was beyond comprehension. "Stop," the colonel commanded. "Now, access or secondary skill identifiers." Vance typed another command. A new section of the file opened, and this was where the technical truth behind the legend was revealed. Skill identifier, Master Quantum Signals Analyst, Tier 1, Skill Identifier. Advanced Cryptographic Linguist, Category 4 Languages, Skill Identifier. Offensive Cyber Operations Specialist Deployment History. Classified, Mission Record. Classified, Special Qualifications, Sole Operator Certified on Project Chimera Prototype. The last line hung in the air. Project Chimera was the official top-secret designation for the very system they were all in the room to learn. They were trainees. Anya Sharma was its master. Colonel Evans let the information sink in, allowing the weight of it to press down on every person in the room, especially Vance. Then, he turned his body to face Sharma directly. In a gesture that shattered every rule of military protocol and tradition, Colonel Evans, a decorated senior officer with 30 years of service, snapped to the position of attention and rendered a slow, perfect, ceremonial salute to the small, quiet sergeant seated before him. "Your assessment of the system is invaluable, Sergeant," he said, his voice resonating with a profound and unmistakable respect. "Thank you for your service." The sight of a full-bird colonel saluting a sergeant sent a shockwave through the room more powerful than any simulated explosion. It was a fundamental reordering of their universe. It wasn't just a gesture of respect. It was a public and damning indictment of every assumption they had made. It was the official validation of quiet competence over loud arrogance. In that single, silent act, Colonel Evans had not only honored Sharma, he had taught every person in that room a lesson that no training manual could ever convey. He held the salute until Sharma, with a calm nod, acknowledged it. Only then did he drop his hand and turn his piercing gaze back to the assembled trainees and finally to the pale and humbled Master Sergeant Vance. His voice was no longer loud, but it carried a weight that was heavier than any shout. "Let this be a lesson for every one of you," he began, his eyes sweeping across the room. "You are trained to analyze signals, to find the truth hidden in the noise. But today you all failed the most basic intelligence test. You analyzed the surface, not the substance. You judged a book by its cover and assumed you knew the story." He took a step toward Vance, who seemed to shrink under the colonel's gaze. "Master Sergeant, you are an expert on the technical specifications of this system. You know every wire, every processor, every line of code. But you know nothing of the spirit that makes it a weapon. You mistook humility for weakness. You mistook silence for ignorance." The colonel gestured back toward Sharma. That woman, that librarian, has operated in environments so hostile, so saturated with threat, that this multi-million-dollar simulation of yours would seem like a vacation. She has held the lives of Tier 1 assault teams in her hands, guiding them through enemy territory using nothing but the whispers she could pull from the air. The encryption she broke here today, the one you thought was theoretical, she has defeated before in the real world, where the consequence of failure is not a red screen, but a black body bag. The silence in the room was now one of shame and profound recalculation. Every trainee was replaying Vance's insults, their own snickers, their own complicity, and feeling the bitter sting of their own ignorance. Evans let the silence hang for a moment longer before delivering the final, decisive blow. Sergeant Sharma was not here as a trainee. She was here as the final authority. Her presence in this class was the test, not of the system, but of its instructors. It was a test to see if you had the wisdom to recognize true expertise, no matter the vessel it comes in. He paused, letting the full weight of the statement land. Master Sergeant, you failed your test. The words were not an attack. They were a simple statement of fact, delivered with the cold, hard finality of a judge's gavel. Vance didn't flinch or argue. He simply stood there, broken, the hollow shell of the arrogant man he had been an hour ago. He finally understood. The librarian had just taught him how to read. The story of what happened in the Advanced Cyber Warfare Center did not stay within its secure walls. It escaped, as stories of such profound vindication always do, spreading through the base like a spark in dry grass. It was first whispered in the chow hall, then dissected in the barracks late at night, then retold with growing embellishment in the smoky haze of the NCO club. It became a piece of institutional folklore almost overnight. The narrative was just too perfect. The arrogant gatekeeper, the quiet professional, the impossible feat, the dramatic reveal, and the protocol-shattering salute from a legendary colonel. It was a modern military fable, a cautionary tale for the proud, and an inspiration for the humble. The story was given a name, the Sharma Protocol. It became shorthand for any situation where an unassuming individual demonstrated shocking and undeniable expertise. Junior soldiers would use it to gently rib an NCO who was being overly dismissive. "Careful, Sergeant," they'd say with a knowing smile. "You might be dealing with a Sharma Protocol." The legend solidified when someone printed a grainy screen grab from the security footage, the exact moment Colonel Evans was saluting Sergeant Sharma, and pinned it to the main bulletin board in the training center's break room. No one ever took it down. It became a permanent fixture, a silent, constant reminder. For Master Sergeant Cole Vance, the event was not a humiliation. It was a demolition. His professional ego had been leveled to the foundation. For 2 days, he didn't show up for duty. Rumors flew that he was being reassigned, or worse, facing a formal reprimand. But on the 3rd day, he returned. He was different. The swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber intensity. His first act was to walk into the empty training hall and stand before Sharma's console, where she was running final system diagnostics before her departure. The handful of other personnel in the room held their breath, expecting a confrontation. Vance stopped a respectful distance away. He did not apologize. An apology would have been for his benefit, not hers. Instead, he asked a question, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance, now bearing only the humble weight of genuine curiosity. "How?" he asked, his eyes on the screen. The biometric signature, cross-referencing it in real time through the data storm. The architecture isn't built for that. It shouldn't be possible. Sergeant Sharma, true to her nature, did not gloat or lecture. She simply turned her chair, tapped a few commands on the console, and brought up a complex data flow schematic. The system's diagnostic subroutine creates a temporary, isolated data buffer during high-intensity processing, she explained, her voice calm and even, the voice of a teacher, not a victor. "You saw it as a potential point of failure. I saw it as a secure backdoor. I routed the target's raw signal fragment to the buffer, used the system's own error-checking protocols to brute force the decryption key, and then pushed the isolated biometric data against the JSOC deep threat database using a compressed query I wrote. It's not a flaw in the system. It's just a feature you hadn't considered. She had turned the system's own defense mechanisms into a weapon. She had seen a tool where he had only seen a procedure. In that moment, Vance understood the vast, immeasurable gulf between his knowledge and her mastery. He wasn't her peer. He was her student. He simply nodded, the lesson landing with the quiet finality of a closing door. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said, and walked away a changed man. The ripples of that day spread far beyond the confines of the base. The Sharma Protocol entered the lexicon of the wider intelligence community, passed along on secure message boards and encrypted channels. It became a teaching point at the highest levels of command, a perfect, real-world example of the core tenet of special operations. Humans are more important than hardware. The legend grew with each telling. In some versions, Sharma had not just decrypted the signal, but had hijacked the enemy satellite that sent it. In others, she had done it all while blindfolded. The myths were exaggerated, but the central truth of the story remained potent and unchanged. Competence does not need to be loud. Master Sergeant Vance's transformation was perhaps the most tangible legacy of the event. He threw himself into his role as an instructor with a newfound zeal, but it was a zeal born of humility, not arrogance. He took down all of his old "I love me" plaques and self-congratulatory memorabilia from his office walls. He replaced them with a single, framed item, the printout of Sharma's impossible decryption result. He started every new class in the same way. He would stand before the trainees, a shadow of his former blustering self, and he would tell them the story of his own failure. He would recount his own words, his own dismissive insults, with brutal honesty. "I called her a librarian," he would say, his voice steady. "I publicly mocked her. I was so certain of my own expertise that I was blind to the real thing standing right in front of me. I want you all to look at this." He would then point to the framed printout. "This is a monument to my own ignorance, and it is the most important lesson you will ever learn in this school. The enemy you will face is not always going to look like a monster. The greatest weapon on the battlefield is not always going to gleam or roar. Sometimes it will be quiet. Sometimes it will be unassuming. Your job is not to make assumptions. Your job is to see the truth. Never, ever underestimate the quiet professional." His story became the most effective teaching tool in the entire curriculum. It resonated with the trainees far more than any technical manual or tactical doctrine. He had turned his greatest professional shame into his greatest instructional strength. Sergeant Sharma herself, of course, was gone. She finished her diagnostics, filed her report, a document that would lead to a fundamental redesign of the system's user interface and processing logic, and then vanished back into the classified world from whence she came. She left no forwarding address, no contact information. She was a ghost who had briefly materialized to teach a vital lesson and then faded away. But she left something powerful behind. She left behind a new standard. She had proven that respect was not a function of rank or appearance, but a currency earned through demonstrated competence. The framed printout, the story passed from one generation of analysts to the next, the very name, Sharma Protocol. These were the artifacts of her quiet victory, a legacy of silence that echoed louder and lasted longer than any boastful shout ever could. A year passed. The Advanced Cyber Warfare Center was a different place. The culture of chest-thumping and bravado that Vance had once fostered had been replaced by a more collaborative, more cerebral atmosphere. The trainees were quieter, more focused. They were taught from day one to question their own biases, to look for strength in unexpected places. The curriculum now included a mandatory block of instruction on cognitive bias and the dangers of assumption, with Master Sergeant Vance's librarian story as its central case study. Vance himself was now the master instructor for the entire facility, a position he had earned not through political maneuvering, but through a profound and observable change in his character and teaching philosophy. He became a mentor to the young soldiers, guiding them with a patience and wisdom he had never before possessed. He taught them that the most important signal to analyze was the one within themselves, the signal of ego, of prejudice, of intellectual laziness. He taught them to silence that noise so they could hear the faint, subtle signal of truth. The story had become institutionalized, a foundational myth for all new signals intelligence analysts. Newcomers would be shown the grainy photo of the salute, they would be told the story, and they would be taught the lesson. Look past the uniform, past the rank, past the gender or the size or the volume of a person's voice. Look for the hands. Look for the calm. Look for the results. That is where you will find the warrior. Anya Sharma was never seen at that facility again. Her name existed only in a heavily redacted after-action report and in the folklore that now permeated the building's walls. Yet, her presence was felt everywhere. It was in the quiet confidence of a young specialist who discovered a novel way to filter data, unafraid to present her findings to senior NCOs. It was in the respectful way instructors now listened to the questions of their students. It was in the very air of the place, an environment where competence was the only currency that mattered. Her legacy was not a statue or a plaque with her name on it. It was a living, breathing change in the heart of an institution. It was a demonstration that one person, through a single act of undeniable professional excellence, could recalibrate an entire culture, replacing a paradigm of prejudice with one of performance. True legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It is the standard you set that others choose to follow. It is the echo your actions leave behind, an echo that continues to shape the world long after you have moved on. Sharma silence had become the facility's guiding principle, a quiet reminder that the most powerful statements are often made without speaking a single word. The ultimate impact of the Sharma Protocol was not measured in revised training manuals or in the humble demeanor of a single master sergeant. It was measured in lives. 18 months after that fateful day, halfway around the world in a dusty, contested valley, a small team of Special Forces operators found themselves cut off and surrounded. Their communications were being jammed by a sophisticated, next-generation enemy system. They were blind, deaf, and minutes away from being overrun. Their only link to the outside world was a young sergeant, fresh out of the Advanced Cyber Warfare Center, huddled over a tactical signals terminal in a command post miles away. The noise was overwhelming, a digital hurricane, just like the Cerberus simulation, but this time it was real. The pressure was immense. The panicked voices of the command staff filled the tent. But the young sergeant was calm. He remembered the story of the quiet woman and the impossible decryption. He remembered the lesson. Do not fight the storm, use it. Instead of trying to punch a signal through the jamming, he did something radical. He found a flaw in the enemy's jamming signal itself, a tiny, recursive echo in its source code. It was the digital equivalent of a faint stutter, something no one was supposed to be able to detect. He used that flaw to piggyback a microburst of data, a message hidden inside the enemy's own weapon. He didn't just break through the jamming. He rode it like a wave. The message reached the stranded team, giving them the enemy's precise location. Air support was called in. The team was saved. In the after-action report, the young sergeant was asked how he even thought to try such an unorthodox technique. His answer was simple. Master Sergeant Vance taught me, he said. He taught us that the answer isn't always in the manual. He taught us to look for the quietest signal in the room. He taught us the Sharma Protocol. That was Anya Sharma's true legacy. It wasn't a memory. It was a living, evolving skill set passed down to a new generation. It was a philosophy of quiet competence that was now actively saving lives on the battlefield. Her single act of professional mastery had become a ripple that spread outwards, touching shores she would never see, saving people she would never meet. The story became a testament to a profound truth, that one's true worth is not found in the noise they make, but in the clarity they create, not in the rank they wear on their chest, but in the standard they hold in their heart, not in the battles they boast about, but in the quiet victories that empower others to win their own. It is a legacy of action, of precision, of a silence that speaks with more authority than any voice. For more stories where precision triumphs over prejudice and where silent competence defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.